Hello, Serena. Welcome to the podcast, Startup Nation.
Hey.
I'm very glad I caught you yesterday at the government event at Stanford. And you're here to share some great knowledge with us, but I wanted to get started by first understanding, who are you, Serena? What is your background and how did you kind of get into the climate tech space?
Yeah, sure. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm the founder and CEO of AirVitalize, where we capture outdoor air pollution to create targeted, healthy spaces outside. So we're not scrubbing the whole atmosphere or anything. We focus on places where there's mountains that traps pollution in a valley to make really healthy spaces in one area. I got involved from a university course when I was in my last year of undergrad, and since then have focused on the opportunity working with the governments in a niche air pollution control market, and then also within the B2B athletic space. So I live up in Fairbanks, Alaska, the third most polluted region in the United States, where we're working our government angle. And then I am down in Los Angeles almost half the time to work with the athletic side as well.
How did you find your way to Fairbanks, Alaska?
Yeah, so the class I started in was actually focused on Alaska. And this class it's called Innovations in Engineering for Global Crises. There's actually a PBS documentary about it called Lives Not Grade. It's great. And my year was focused on going to Alaska. So the first semester, they basically have you go up to people on the street and you ask them, what's your biggest problem? And so we were really focused on electricity to start out. But eventually realized people burn wood in Alaska to heat their homes because electricity is so expensive. So eventually got focused on this idea of wood pollution, wood burning, pollution from the air. And then the second semester made a solution and then pivoted about a year later after I had graduated. And after we pivoted, it just made sense for me to move up to Alaska to build trust in the community and really understand the problem space a lot better.
When you say build trust in the community, can you expand on that a little bit more? Because I know you are building relationships with the local governments there. How do you build trust with the community?
Yeah, really good question. The government is a really interesting beast because at the end of the day, the government is there to serve the people as best as the government can. And so really understanding the people and the unique needs has been super critical to what we've been doing. And so to get there, I have to go to Fairbanks and I have to better understand the community. The reason I started focusing on Fairbanks instead of Los Angeles, which is where I'm from, where I went to undergrad, we needed to work in a place where there was just less people. LA has 10 million people, and the air quality control group manages not just LA County, but San Bernardino, Ventura, and many other places. So it just would have been impossible to really connect with all of those people. But when I moved up to Fairbanks, there's only 80,000 people in the entire county. It's called boroughs up there. And 30,000 people in the city of Fairbanks. And so when I got up there, I was able to go out, meet people, and then also start connecting with people based on what their hobbies are. So I picked up cross-country skiing, which was very tough for me, who had never really skied before, just because it was a point of small talk amongst people and things along those lines. And then tabling at festivals to get signatures of support, all while building relationships with these legislators who are so focused on representing their communities that I wasn't able to speak to them about what their priorities were unless I really understood what their constituents' priorities were, because all of the legislators have the really great initiative to want to represent those constituents. And so trying to serve their purpose as well has been a really big part of our journey.
It's like really understanding the people that you are serving by getting to the very local levels and interacting them with on a day-to-day basis, but also being able to speak their language by having similar hobbies and by being in those similar spaces as well.
Yeah, exactly.
If we were to take a step back, it seems like, based on the talk yesterday, you have a very deep understanding of policy and you come from a public policy background. Can you talk a little bit about how your public policy background has impacted the way that you work with the local government at Fairbanks?
Yeah, for sure. So in undergrad, I was studying public policy before I got involved in this engineering course. And I was working for a bunch of different organizations, a big public utility out in Los Angeles, the LA Chamber of Commerce, workforce development for the county, some consulting amongst others. And I was really focused on making their climate plans as a big part of it, planning workforce for climate plans, amongst other things. And realized that even the least ambitious of these plans wouldn't be possible because we didn't have the technology to reach those goals. And so that's a big reason why my last year of undergrad, I switched to wanting to build the technology that could help policymakers reach those goals. And so it wasn't necessarily focused on air pollution to start, but that was the overall goal, was policy needs innovation in it to be able to reach the goals that government is setting based on what the people want to see. How can we help bridge that gap? And that's really how I ended up getting involved in the niche field of air pollution control, which hasn't been innovated in 50 years since the catalytic converter. And then also focusing on the B2B side, because government can't be your only customer, of course.
Okay, we are about to arrive at this pie shop because today is Pie Day.
Woo!
And Serena came up with a great idea that we should get some pie on our way here. So we're here to get some pie. And we'll see you in just a second.
We're rolling.
We're rolling. All right, we got our pie. Woohoo! In celebration, Pie Day. What? Oopsies. Yikes. 3-second rule. Here's the strawberry. Oh, actually, I think that's cherry. Yeah. If we were to back up a little bit, you mentioned that some of the initial funding that you got was through like Blackstone's Launchpad, as well as the I-Corps program from the NSF.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about how you found these programs and how you were able to get involved with them?
Yeah, good question. In the investor world, they have, words like angel, pre-seed, Series A, all of that. In the grant world, people don't really use those terms as often. So you're looking for idea stage grants or social impact grants, early customer discovery grants, and I was doing a ton of Googling about all of it, getting on newsletters where they send out opportunities for whatever my demographics are, female founder, young founder, climate. So I get these and I just read every single email that comes in, and I look at all of them that could apply. And then I also send them to other people where if it doesn't apply to me, maybe it applies to you. So I'll forward it to them, and then they keep me in mind and they forward stuff to me if they see it too. So kind of just like the idea of, the tide rises, all boats float, with the other startups I come across that I believe in their mission too. And so all of that helped us get the business model going. What's a roadmap? How do we calculate market size, branding stuff? We incorporated using free small business clinic, and then just kind of set this vision going forward. And then in 2024 is really where we get to this growth moment where we ended up getting over $200K of funding from many different opportunities through that, once we got into the full-scale stage when we were building our MVP throughout 2024.
So you started off with applying for grants, and once you were able to get your prototype going, MVP going, then you went off to apply for a greater amount of grants. What made you decide to apply for grants instead of pursuing the VC funding round that a lot of founders love to pursue?
Well, one, I didn't know too much about it. I started out in the social impact space. That was what our class was focused on. A lot of the tech that comes out of that class goes to the nonprofit realm. But also, we are just creating a very new industry in general. And so even now when we're kind of starting to raise VC funding, people either see the vision or they don't. And at this stage, we already have a case study. We have our air pollution that I can show you. And so that's much more proof than a little cardboard thing with some aluminum in it. And so getting to the point, I think in general, for hardware companies especially, you have to have something to show before you approach investors, or know a ton of investors already, from your undergrad or your family friends, or something that puts you in a certain niche that's not the majority of people. And so we were just way too early, we're still too early for many people to be investable. And it also just seems like a pretty big distraction as well, because when you meet with an investor, investors are very, very smart people, getting you from that early stage, early revenue to become $1 billion company. That's their specialty. We weren't at that early stage, early revenue. We were at that part where we needed to get somewhere where we could prove stuff out. We needed to know way more about who our customers were, who was going to pay for that. And then eventually we started doing programs that taught us about investors also, started making those relationships throughout 2024 to learn about all of those elements. So the short answer is grants were really our only way forward. I think for software people, dare I say, it's a lot easier. It's a different journey for sure. You know, you're not walking in with software and people just throw money at you. But nowadays, if I want to code something, I could do it with an AI prompt. I can have something coded in, or it looks like prototype within a couple of days, if that. And then I can, while still working a full-time job, get a waiting list going and see if there's market traction. And in 2 weeks, I have more to show than a hardware person in 2 years. So just the struggle of that element, it's really made it important to apply for grants. And then there's the whole idea of you want to keep control of the company. I don't know if you've seen the Lorax, but the guy in there is selling clean air, and then he only, sells it to certain people and focuses on business only. I'm a big believer of the double bottom line element, where I'm not going to be the guy from the Lorax. We support all healthy air initiatives, and we want to make sure that we're equitably deploying our stuff too. So really figuring out our values was a big part of that process as well.
And I bet that in the process of trying to apply to all the different grants, like you said, you applied to so many of them, and the government is a very difficult system to navigate.
Yeah.
You were still able to capture a pretty significant grant money after you were able to build the initial.
Yeah.
How did you go about applying for grants? And for founders who might not be as aware of the grant opportunities out there, what are some advice that you could share with them?
Yeah, great question. So there are the bigger government grants, SBIRs, STTRs are really good to know about. They're going to be accessible if you have a very strong PhD, very strong team, or a lot of traction already. We did apply for one, we didn't get it. And a big reason for our main point of feedback was really the team. And so for early stage founders or people without that expertise, those are very, very big undertakings, and they're worth it once you have the traction and whatnot. And you can ask to consult with a grant writer if you want to, and they'll kind of tell you if you're there or not yet typically. But for the ones we're applying for, at first it's a cost benefit analysis. So we're doing a program, let's say, and it's going to give us $1,500, but they're going to make us do 300 hours of work for it. And they'll say between different sessions, different things you're doing. I mean, 300 is probably a stretch, but enough where your time is worth very little for what you're doing. Maybe they make you travel, you have to focus on other things, but you have to come to this humbling realization that $1,500 to build your next prototype is worth more than your time right now. And that can be hard for a lot of folks to wrap their minds around, because especially if you're coming from a pretty good college, you've been a high performer your whole life, you feel like your time is worth a lot. But really, it's that balance of your mission versus not your mission. As you grow, though, we don't apply for grants anymore that are for that little amount of money that have time attached to it, because now our time is better spent on commercialization, on new designs, optimization, things like that. But when you're applying for a grant, to be a bit more hands-on, finding where your cost-benefit analysis is within that. But then when you're applying, looks very specifically, what is the grant for? Do we apply to the criteria? If you're not sure, reach out to the person that's coordinating it and ask them, because it's not worth your time to do it. And then after that, I would say, make sure you're articulating your value proposition to that specifically. So what's going to work to talk to investors is not going to work for a social impact grant, for example. The social impact grant might care that I have a viable business model. They might care. They don't care about my market size, typically. They don't care about my distribution channels to cut cost and to get places faster. They care about how many people can we impact and how can we make that impact quicker. So you need to adjust what you're saying to reach those different audiences and focus it in. That's just one example. And then always, for pitch competitions too, always say what you're going to do with the funding specifically. So they're going to give you $3,000. I'm going to put $700 to this customer discovery conference. I'm going to put $1,000 to product development for this specific part of our product. By giving you this money, you're going to directly impact this many people. And so early on, that amount of people, if you're making a hardware prototype, might not even be the impact yet, right? It's our small scale ones weren't going to have that impact. But what we can say is it's going to get us to impacting 1 billion people 6 months faster, or some type of metric. Like, you giving me money isn't just for us both to feel good, like you are actually helping us. And they are. So really communicating that element. The other thing I would add is for funding, you're in the Silicon Valley. I'm sure the hype around investment, I mean, even just being out here from Alaska is crazed. It's so like everyone's like, oh, they've fundraised $2 million. Someone will introduce someone to me and they fundraised $2 million. I'm like, cool. Like, what are you building? What's your impact? It's not, the amount of money you get is not a metric of your success. The metric of your success is really what's the impact you're making. And so with that, the best money is customer money. That's the first focus. Second best is pitch competitions. You walk up, you do a pitch, you leave with non-dilutive funds. There's no strings attached. Those are awesome. We won a few of those. And then grants. Grants often have elements attached to it. Maybe it's you do these curriculum programs for something like an SBIR. It's very strict accounting. And then there's other types of funding. Also, you can do debt financing, for example, loans. If you have a low risk startup, you might want to do debt financing because you can get there.
What is a low risk tech or startup?
My sister owns a swim lesson company. And so there's some risk, right? She does it. She's in Santa Barbara. She goes to people's private pools and teaches their kids how to swim, which is awesome. Because she can generate revenue very quickly, and it's a proven industry, she doesn't need to go to venture capital to scale. But let's say you want to scale quickly. She's profitable as a business, but let's say she wants to become $1 billion business also. If she goes to a VC, she's going to spend a ton of time figuring out the VC world. She's going to dilute her company and lose her ownership. If she goes to the bank and says, hey, I'm making 3x returns right now. I want to open a branch in San Francisco, San Diego, and I need $5 million to do it. Here's my track record. Here's my financials. Can I get a loan? You're going to have to do a lot of the preparedness to get to the loan place, but then you get the loan and then you pay back the loan over time. You'll have a little bit of interest, sure, but you own your full company. And then you know that you're going to be making that revenue. So like if you have an AI startup that's doing law things, I'm not an AI expert, but let's say that you're optimizing legal process for someone and you can start getting revenue really quickly. If you don't have a long lead time for building, if you can start making money and then get to a break even point, then you should start looking at debt financing as a viable option to grow your business, to keep control. Because you hear of all these founder stories, you get a $500 million exit, but you only make $1 million off of it. You've been working on it for 10 years. 3 or 4 of those years you weren't paid. That's a net loss for your overall career and financial style. So that's a really good route to go. And there's banks that will focus on debt financing, and there's growing opportunities in that. And only after you've explored all of those models, and there's probably some others out there, then I think venture capital is the place to look, especially for harder tech businesses, or if you are looking to scale, like Phil's Coffee probably could have done debt financing, but they did venture capital. So it just kind of depends. I just think that it's good to know the order of funding you should be chasing, and then not try to sink too much of your time to fundraising. And then viewing that as a metric of success, I think, is a really dangerous echo chamber to get into.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point you make, which is venture funding is one option, but there are multiple different options that you should explore before actually jumping into the venture funding route. Because like a lot of people say, it's a marriage between the venture fund as well as the founder, right? Once you are tied to them, there's a lot of strings that are attached. And so knowing that there are options like debt financing and knowing that there are grant options and kind of really doing your research on that is a very important thing to do.
Definitely.
Now, I kind of want to address maybe the elephant in the room, which is climate is a fairly sensitive topic right now, politically. And some people are saying that there's a significant decrease in the amount of funding available for climate. How are you positioning your company in the midst of this craziness?
Yes, very good question. Yeah, it is definitely a changing time for the climate space. And a big part of why investors are leaning away from climate is they haven't seen exits and returns that folks have been wanting to. I think that there's still a good amount of potential within the space. And there are climate companies that have been profitable. But what matters for climate companies, in my opinion, is to stop focusing on politics and start focusing on policy, which is what I was speaking about in the event that we met at. And so what that means for the folks who weren't at the event is political science versus public policy. Political science is how you win an election, how you get We balance politics to get your intentions through. Public policy, which is my background, is the 500-page law that's written in and passed, and the economic payoffs of 100 years down the line to the microeconomic today, right, for every policy, and thinking all that through. And so what's changed in last year with President Joe Biden versus now with President Donald Trump is the politics. Politics are very different. So for example, President Joe Biden was really focused on many different things, including solar, but he was also a proponent for continuing to use coal, clean coal, which a lot of climate people disagreed with. That wasn't part of his political branding, but it was a part of the policy that was continuous across. President Donald Trump, I was just reading today the Department of Energy's energy goals. And yeah, drilling oil and energy security is a priority, but they're also doing hydroelectric as a priority, nuclear as a priority, amongst a couple of others, geothermal as a priority. And I know that military bases are still focused on creating carbon neutral locations, but not because it's carbon neutral, but because it is a true form of resiliency and independence for energy, right? So the branding changes, but the message is the same. And it all depends on if you're going to agree or disagree with a couple of hypotheses, right? One is that our climate is changing, whether that's, because of the natural progression of things, because of human, fossil fuels, whatever you want to call it. If we take it as a fact that the climate is changing to something we are not familiar with living in, then everything else revolves around that point. And so when you're looking at something and you change your phrasing to, I am working on solar because of energy independence, and that the Las Vegas Air Force base or something like that needs to be able to function, but geothermal won't work here, hydro, but we need to be very secure. It's a really great argument for installing solar at a location. A really great argument for combining it with government. But when you're saying, something that's not the same argument, it doesn't fit in the same. And so I think one thing that people can do in the climate space to really stay relevant is, just because your messaging changes, it doesn't mean your mission does. I think is a really important point. Your brand, of course, is very important, but if you're making solar powers and your mission is to provide clean energy, it doesn't matter if you're doing that because of energy independence or because of climate change. You're still doing it. You're still doing it. And that's what matters, is figuring out how you can still do it. As far as I know, some of the investment landscape's a bit nervous because there haven't been exits and a lot of things are changing. I can't speak to that as much as I would like to. What I know for our industry within the air pollution control sector is that we aren't a climate tech, really. We're a climate resiliency technology. And so the difference is clean tech is something like solar panels. Maybe they help with independence and whatnot, but really they're figuring out how we stop creating gigatons of emissions, right? That's the kind of clean tech angle, and that's very important. I think we should keep working on it, just my own personal beliefs. But where I'm standing at, and only a handful of other companies, is climate resiliency. So again, if we take this hypothesis that the climate is changing, what do we need to do to survive? And for people who live in regions with temperature inversions, that area where pollution is currently compacted shrinks as global heat rises. So we're producing more air pollution the past 5 years in the United States. Even though it's gotten better since the 70s, we've never seen it increase until the last couple of years. And so we're seeing increase in that and this shrinking element. There's a very real chance that living in a city like Los Angeles is going to knock decades off your life in only a dozen years or so. And so thinking about these issues, same thing with extreme heat, this isn't going to be a politics issue, right? They're still interested in knowing about extreme heat because it's going to impact our food security if people can't go and pick crops and things like that. So it's finding those niche areas where policy isn't going to change. And luckily, air pollution, the policies that we've focused on, those 500-page documents, none of that's changed. And I'd recommend for people in the climate space, for investors also, don't just pay attention to the headlines that are coming out. Find the laws that affect your industries. Read the laws that affect your industries, cover to cover, it's almost the same as knowing your rights. You know, you have the right to remain silent. Maybe you don't hear about the right to remain silent until you read it in the headlines that someone didn't respect that right. You want to know what the legal part is, so when the headlines change, you know where you're positioned already and what's going to stay, you know, the concrete under your feet versus the bridge you might be walking on that could change.
And I think the reason why you're able to neutralize the narrative is precisely because you're very well read into what the policy papers and what the laws look like.
Yeah.
For some founders who don't come from a policy background or a law background, how do they learn more about the laws and the policies that are going around in the midst of all the media that is kind of grabbing everyone's attention?
Right. So, the sensationalism. There's so much. There's so much going on. And one of my favorite teachers when I was in high school was my math teacher. Shout out, Mr. Herman. And his whole thing with math was you have to have grit. Every question you have on an AP exam on any math test, doesn't matter what the last question was. It doesn't matter how much your head hurts or what's going on. You have to approach every question with grit, stay focused on it, keep looking at it, and really dig deep. And in his opinion, what mattered in math wasn't that you know how to do the problem. It's just that you have grit and everything else will follow. And I've definitely taken that as a core principle in my life, especially because this great man raised our AP test scores in our area by hundreds of people passing the calculus exam versus when he started, I think, a couple dozen, if that. And so I think it's really true. And you're approaching this 500-page document. Maybe you don't read it on your computer. Maybe you print it out, whatever works for you. And you just read it. You just go through and you read it. You have a question on something, you highlight it, you'll come back to it. You read the entire thing. You don't Command F to find the part that's most relevant for you. You dig into it. And maybe you can get help with using an AI or something to help you condense it, or really making sure you're understanding the scene, because a law passed in 1920 that relies on your industry is probably a bit different now, and what they were thinking of at the time and the intentions of the law. And just really pour through it. And you'll be able to find stuff like it by, just Googling stuff or watching a YouTube video. Let's say you're working in micro hydroelectric dams in areas that there are salmon runs. Very niche. I don't know too much about it. Of course, a little bit living in Alaska. But you can look up a YouTube video of the history of hydroelectric dam laws in America and worldwide. And it'll tell you everything in like 10 minutes with great little caricatures and whatnot. How do you do that, right? And so I think in the age of information, it takes a lot of just buckling down and being like, I'm going to sit here and I'm not going to wait for the TikTok to show up that's going to teach me about this and give me a couple headlines and maybe explain it if I watch another one or two. I'm going to sit and take the time to fully digest the information that's relevant to my field. So that way, when there is a change of something in politics, and especially if you're in the B2G sector, but really just in general, I can make sure I'm prepared to change my messaging so I can still achieve my mission. And I know what the foundation is going to be either way. And that's how you center your mission, really, to work in a B2G space.
I think that's so wise. And I also think, if any time, this is the best time to educate yourself, because there are so many resources, right? Like we have AI at our disposal. We have YouTube videos.
Right.
And if you want to learn more about law, you can read the research papers and then do more research on top of that, right?
Right.
To wrap things up a little bit, I know you're looking for funding right now. If there is a VC who is listening into this podcast right now, what kind of partner are you looking for?
Hey, great question. I appreciate you asking it. So we're definitely in angel pre-seed stage. We're looking for folks who are experienced in, really our strategic spaces would be folks who are used to hardware, people interested in athletics, people in B2G or GovTech space is definitely a plus. Social impact is a plus. Climate is a plus, and also health and public health as an element we're also definitely playing into. What would really be a sweet spot, what I would love to have, is someone who has worked in creating a new industry before. So thinking about, the people who started carbon capture, the people who started the internet, things like that, the early adopters of seeing things like the iPhone going to become a thing. We're creating a new industry. We're kind of at the middle of outdoor air quality monitoring, indoor air filtration, and outdoor carbon capture. And then there's AirVitalize right in the center. And so we're adjacent, but we need folks who are going to see the vision. And part of that is its own strategic element as a whole. So I'd say folks that fit into one or any of those is really ideal. And folks who see the value in having healthy air and see the hypotheses we're making and will help us spot any gaps in that while also helping us navigate everything along the way.
And I think your company is doing pretty extraordinary things. And the fact that you guys have been able to build this up and the impact, just looking at that tube, right?
Yeah.
That's crazy, the amount of dust and dirt and all of
Yeah.
this pollution that it's been able to capture. So best of luck on
Thank
your
you.
fundraising
Thank
journey.
you.
Thank you so much for joining me today and having pie with me
Yes.
on Pie
Yes.
Day 314.
Yes.